Thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the webinar. I'm Michelle, the Chief of Staff at BookPal, and today I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker, Carmine Gallo. I've been with BookPal for 5 years, and one of the best parts about my job is the opportunity to connect clients with new and exciting content. At BookPal, we really believe in the power that books have to ignite continuous learning and growth in all of us. And I'm also personally a big fan of Talk Like TED. So when I heard that Carmine was writing a new book, I was very eager to read it. In this book, his newest book, Carmine applies classic speaking techniques to the modern world. And in this current age of accelerated technologies, the ability to successfully communicate our ideas is more valuable than ever. Therefore, I'm thrilled to have Carmine here with us today to speak on the art of persuasion. So a little bit about Carmine. He's the author of several international best-selling books, including Talk Like TED and The Storyteller's Secret. He's an expert communications coach and speaker, transforming leaders into powerful storytellers of the world's largest brands. He delivers highly engaging and inspiring and actionable keynote presentations, which we'll get a little taste of today. And we're very excited to have him share with us the key takeaways from his latest book, 5 Stars, Communication Secrets to Getting from Good to Great. So a little bit about what's to come. We'll start with a presentation about 20 minutes presented by Carmine. And then we'll do a 5-minute Q&A, and feel free to submit your questions at any time throughout the presentation. At the end of the webinar, we'll also be giving away a copy of 5 Stars to 2 lucky attendees, so stay till the end to find out if you're a winner. A little housekeeping: if you have any technical questions, please send us a message in the chat box or tweet us at bookpal_US using the hashtag BPWebinar. Also, the webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out the recording to all attendees next week. All right, so Carmine, we'll go ahead and let you take it from here.
Oh, thank you, Michelle, and thank you everybody for attending. I don't do a lot of the third-party webinars very often, but BookPal was such a natural extension of our relationship because, as many of you do, I personally use the BookPal service for large book orders and selling at events and trainings. So it was only a natural extension of this partnership, and I know that everyone who is a BookPal member is inspired to learn and grow and read. Perfect audience. This is exactly the type of audience that I enjoy speaking to. Michelle had it right. This whole idea of mastering the art of persuasion is no longer a soft skill. It is the fundamental skill to get from good to great in the age of ideas. Here's the theme and the reason why I wrote 5 stars. As the forces of globalization, automation, and artificial intelligence combine to disrupt every field, every career, it's the great persuaders who will stand out, get ahead, and reach their potential. I was thrilled to get Adam Grant's endorsement. Many of you are familiar with the Wharton professor's books like Originals. But in this endorsement, he actually summarized it really well. Could not have said it better myself. I wish I had written this, but I'm glad he did. As technology threatens to displace countless jobs and skills, the ability to communicate is becoming more important than ever. Remember, Adam Grant wrote the book called Originals, and in that book, which inspired me, he says that by definition, originals have to overcome skepticism because their ideas are new and novel. Originals must learn to champion original ideas. So you can have a great idea, folks. If you can't communicate it, it doesn't matter. I was also thrilled to get an endorsement by Tony Robbins, and once again, he summarizes it very well. Mastering that ancient art is the key to thriving in a world of rapid technological change. And once again, developing superior communication skills. No longer an option. It is fundamental for success. Why? Why is it fundamental? What is the ROI on developing our communication skills as leaders? The billionaire Warren Buffett said all of us need to keep investing in our skills. And he said the most important skill of all is the ability to develop your public speaking skills, to change hearts and minds. In fact, he says elevating this one skill alone will boost a person's professional value by 50%. Instantly. Remarkably, according to economists and historians, persuasion is now responsible for 30% of the US economy. one person persuading another person to change their mind. And in many fields, and probably the fields of many of our listeners here today, the role that persuasion plays in your daily life is more like 75 to 100% of your day. If you are persuasive, you can make more money faster than at any time in history. You can sell products, rally teams, attract employees, and trigger substantive change. Here's the way it was explained to me by some of the historians who I've talked to. In the agrarian age, if you could plow a field faster than the farmer next door, you still wouldn't receive that much more wealth. In the industrial age, if you could assemble a widget a little faster, you would not grow wealth substantially. But in the knowledge economy, a person who can express their idea a little better than someone else can see a sudden massive increase in wealth that is unprecedented in human history. Here's the cool part, and I go into this in the book. Aristotle gave us the building blocks of persuasion, the building blocks that we use today. Every great communicator uses the same formula that Aristotle outlined 2,000 years ago. Aristotle is the father of persuasion, and he actually gave us the formula that leaders use today to change hearts and minds. Historically, from the Declaration of Independence to John F. Kennedy's moon landing to the launch of Google and the founding of Apple, great communicators follow the same formula. And here it is. Aristotle said, for persuasion to occur, for me to change your mind about a particular topic, three things must be present. One is called ethos. Ethos is simply credibility, character. But the ones that we're going to be focused on today is the second element, which is logos, logic. That means making a logical argument backed by data, facts, and evidence. But here's the key. Persuasion cannot occur in the absence of what Aristotle called pathos, emotion. Emotion grabs our attention and makes a deep connection between me and you, the speaker and the listener. Most of our behavior is governed by emotions. You may not think so, but it is. Remarkably, from the founding fathers to Abraham Lincoln, from the fight for civil rights to the moon landing, persuaders trigger movements. And you can find evidence of Aristotle's formula in all great movements. Emotion is the fastest path to the brain. And for today's webinar, for the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how to hack that system to make sure that your ideas get heard. Now, that's sort of the background. That's a little of the history. That's the theories behind all of this and why I wrote 5 stars. But now I'm going to give you 5 specific actionable tips from the book, from part 3 of 5 stars, that will help you sharpen your persuasive edge. Take some notes. If you have any questions, we're going to take some Q&A at the end of this webinar. Let's begin with the most powerful rhetorical tool of all, and that is storytelling. As humans, we are wired for story. We think in narrative. We process our world in narrative. We communicate in narrative. As one venture capitalist told me, an investor behind Uber and Airbnb, the storytellers have an unfair advantage. I want to give you that unfair advantage. Alan Alda is, of course, the MASH actor, and he's been in a lot of shows. Everyone knows him. I didn't know until a few years ago that he's actually very passionate about science and communication, the communication of science. He wrote a wonderful book some of you might be familiar with. I love the title. I wish I could come up with a title like this. If I understood you, would I have this look on my face? It's all about communication skills. But he really goes into storytelling. He said, if we're looking for a way to bring emotion to someone, a story is the perfect vehicle. Well, he's on to something. Thanks to neuroscience, we've learned more about storytelling in the last 10 years than we've known since our ancestors began painting pictures on cave walls. We know what works, and we can prove it scientifically. Storytelling around a campfire started some 40,000 years ago. Anthropologists say it was a major milestone in human development because when fire extended the daylight, people shared stories. Here's the interesting part. We still do that. This is how we share information with each other. Here's how we inspire. We still sit around campfires telling stories. Now, this is a very expensive fire pit. It's a real fire pit on the beach of Necker Island, the island owned by Richard Branson. I've had several interviews, face-to-face interviews with Richard Branson, and he's told me some very interesting things about storytelling. First, he says storytelling can be used to drive change. He believes it's impossible to become a successful entrepreneur or a leader today without being a good storyteller. He gathers his team around this campfire on Necker Island, and he has told me, Carmine, our best ideas, our very best ideas often come from those Friday gatherings around the campfire. Here's why. Here's why. I'm not sure if, actually, no, I know as a fact that Branson has studied the science of storytelling, because I do remember he's referred to it on one of his blogs. So he knows this too. Our brains are wired for story. A remarkable thing happens to our brains on story. I interviewed Yuri Hassan, who is a Princeton professor, a neuroscientist. He conducts experiments that show when someone tells another person a story, the speaker's brains and the listener's brains are in sync. Here's an actual screenshot from one of his studies. He calls this neural coupling. That's just academic and scientific jargon for making a mind meld. Two people are the most closest and in sync when they're communicating through stories. Brene Brown, who is a famous TED speaker, said stories are just data with a soul. All of you have the data, you have the evidence, now let's back it up and wrap it with soul. Ask yourself, what stories can I share? You should, in all of your presentations, you should be sharing personal stories, personal anecdotes. You should be sharing case studies. I just saw a new B2B survey. This was done with B2B companies, and they said 70% of B2B prospects want to hear more customer stories in order to be influenced. So I think this applies in every field across every country. Personal stories, case studies, and brand stories too are very effective. Stories about the company you work for or the brand. Is there a backstory that's very interesting that very few people know about? Is there a historical story that few people know about? Very closely related to this, I'm going to give you another tool to sharpen the edge. When you do tell stories, follow a formula. Follow the 3-act formula. This is, how can I want to say this in a way that doesn't make it sound like it's too formulaic, because it's quite not. The way all great stories have been structured for thousands of years, from books to today's current Hollywood movies, they're all set up in the same formula. So it's not a bad thing, and I've just caught myself, because when I mention the word formula, people think, oh, well, it's contrived. When we talk about formula in this case, this is the way that all great stories have a structure to them. So I'm not just making this up. This is just the way that all great stories have been written. This is the way the brain likes to process stories. So why not use this 3-act formula for our very own presentations? And you can do this in a business presentation. So what is the 3-part structure? And you'll begin to recognize this in all the movies you see now. Number 1 is Act 1 is the setup. So this is the hero's world before the adventure starts. In a business presentation, who's the hero? The hero is always your customer. Before you begin to talk about your product, describe the world in which your customer is currently doing business in. That gives your customer a lot of confidence that you understand their world very well. Act 2 in every movie, and you know this, from Star Wars to every major movie, has to have a conflict. Otherwise, it's not an interesting movie. That's where the hero's world is literally turned upside down and the adventure begins. Well, in a business presentation, remember, the hero is your customer. The hero's world is turned upside down because there is a challenge. or an obstacle that the customer faces. As an aside, I wrote a book years ago. One of my first communication books was on Steve Jobs, the presentation secrets of Steve Jobs. The brilliance of Jobs was that this conflict piece, in this piece, he could convince you that you had a struggle or a problem that you didn't even know you had. That's genius. That's genius. For most people, there's an obvious struggle that the company or your customer is trying to overcome. Finally, the resolution. And that is where now you could talk about your product, your service, your idea, and how it's going to transform the hero's world. Again, this is a time-tested formula. I don't mind using that word. It works. It works for books, plays, movies. It'll work for you. Closely related to storytelling, another tool in your toolkit should be analogy. The power of analogy is very critical. By comparing two different things that share a similarity, you help your audience understand abstractions or abstract concepts. I don't want to get too immersed in the differences between a metaphor and an analogy. A metaphor is a type of analogy that also compares two things. When Shakespeare wrote, Juliet is the sun, well, Juliet is not the sun, really, but it's a metaphor. If he had likened Juliet to the features of the sun, using the word like or as, it would have been an analogy. So let's not get too confused. I sort of use analogy as a catch-all. The point is that you have an abstract concept, and A is the concept, B is the concrete thing that people need to know. Okay, let me give you an example, and then it'll all come together. Warren Buffett loves analogies. Warren Buffett, one of his favorite analogies is, in business, I look for economic castles protected by unbreachable moats. He even said he looks for a strong CEO who acts as a knight to guard the castle. He rarely gets through a conversation without an analogy. I love this one. This is also by Warren Buffett. He once read a book by Ted Williams, who was a left fielder for the Boston Red Sox. And Williams had a diagram, and he talked about only swinging at pitches in the sweet spot, in that strike zone. And if he waited for the pitch that was in the sweet spot, he would bat 400. The trick in investing, said Warren Buffett, is to watch the pitches go by in the lower corners and to be okay if you're not swinging at those pitches. So again, what we're seeing is that Buffett takes something complex, impersonal, and abstract, like finance, and uses analogies to make them sound simple, human, and concrete. In business presentations today, this is a very powerful rhetorical tool, so please start adopting it. Here's another interesting example that just happened. You may have heard that IBM and the US Department of Energy just built a supercomputer called Summit. It's the world's fastest computer until somebody else will come along in the next few weeks, but that's how it goes. It operates at 200 quadrillion calculations per second. And that's fast. I don't know how to put that in human terms. Well, IBM and the Department of Energy realized that as well. So they had in their press releases, on all their social media, they had comparisons. These are analogies. I'll give you two. They said one person doing one calculation a second would have to live for more than 6 billion years to match what the machine can do in 1 second. They said if a stadium built for 100,000 people was full and everyone in it had a modern laptop, it would take 20 stadiums to match the computing power in this supercomputer that you see on your screen. Again, what are they doing? They're taking these big numbers, big data sets, and using a time-tested storytelling technique called analogy to make it come alive. This technique is in one of the chapters in 5 stars, and it's a bit counterintuitive. A number of people have been asking me about it, so I'd like to present it to you today. If you want to appear competent and confident, use simple, short words. Simple, short words. According to Ken Siegel, who worked for Apple and put the I in iMac, Ken says that simple words and phrases are the most potent weapons in business today. Simple words attract customers, motivate employees, and help to outthink competitors. Many of you are readers, obviously. You know Daniel Kahneman's work. He's the Nobel Prize-winning economist who wrote that amazing psychology book, Thinking Fast and Slow. There's a chapter in that book about simple words. And he even says if you want to appear as competent, it sounds counterintuitive, but use short, simple words. There's some reasons for this. This goes back throughout history. Winston Churchill once said the short words are the most ancient to a culture, so they really have the deeper meaning with people that you're trying to persuade. In 5 Stars, I write about John Kennedy and the power of his words to inspire a generation. One of the reasons why JFK's words continue to resonate today is because Kennedy was a good editor. If you visit the Kennedy Museum just outside of Boston, you'll see the actual inauguration speech that was delivered in 1961, one of the shortest inaugural addresses in presidential history. Take a look carefully. I took that picture. They allow you to take photographs in there. Kennedy crossed out words and phrases. He crossed out long words and replaced them with short ones. Interesting. Why is he doing that? Because it's meant to be read, it's meant to be heard, it's meant to inspire people. In business, I feature a company called Collective Health. They structure health insurance plans for large companies. Their material is written in 3rd grade language. Now, here's a company run by surgeons and academics, but their own research shows that people do not understand a topic nearly as well as they say they do. And that's why all the definitions are written in 3rd grade language. And those surveys, by the way, are taken with just average employees, and they're also taken with healthcare leaders and professionals. Most people will say they know what a deductible is, which, by the way, is the simplest term in life insurance is deductible, and most people don't. Most people can't even define that, let alone the more complex words. So they have literally reduced their words to 3rd grade language. And I pressed them on that. I said, oh, come on, not 3rd grade. You mean 8th grade, maybe? Nope, 3rd grade. Interesting. In 5 Stars, I also talked to NASA astronauts. NASA is interesting. NASA gets 18,000 applications a year for 12 spots for people, lucky candidates to become astronauts. You can have advanced degrees. You can have PhDs. You need to be a test pilot. I mean, there's a lot of credentials just to get through the door. But those skills and credentials only get you so far. The finalists are brought to Houston to see how effective they are with their interpersonal skills. Are they clear, concise? Can they establish rapport? If you think about it, it makes sense, doesn't it? You're going to be stuck in confined quarters on the space station for a year with people from other cultures. You are also expected to be the face of the agency. You're out there all the time, giving talks and presentations, getting people excited about the research you're doing. Yes, you have to be a PhD or a doctor, a biologist, and you have to have your credentials and you have to have experience. But if you're not an excellent communicator and you're a standout communicator, you still won't get to be an astronaut. And finally, I have a chapter in the book that's all on creativity and communication. And I felt like I had to offer this chapter because I realized I can help you communicate and articulate an original idea. But if you do not have an original idea, it doesn't matter. I can't help you. You need to have an original idea. So I spoke to a number of people in the creative space and also great leaders who are good communicators and creative communicators. And they practice several habits. Steve Jobs was one of them. Actually, Steve Jobs practiced all of these. One is they connect ideas from different fields. I love this one. Steve Jobs famously studied calligraphy and applied it to computers. If you read Walter Isaacson's book on Leonardo da Vinci, I'm sure many of you did, you may remember Leonardo was a creative genius because he combined art and science. This one, the second one, applies to all of us. Creative individuals, great creative leaders read far more books than average, far more. Really off the charts compared to the average American. Bill Gates reads 50 books a year. Warren Buffett, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, voracious readers. The best communicators pull ideas from a wide range of books on different topics, and by doing so, it makes you more interesting. It makes you more creative. You're a more interesting communicator. I like this one. This was new to me. Find a theme song. Here's something interesting. Science shows that film scores kickstart the creative flow in your brain. Movie music. Movie music is meant to enhance a story, not replace the story. And so some great writers will swear by it. My favorites include Rocky, of course, but Gladiator. What's that one by Denzel? Someone will remember. Oh, the Remember the Titans. Those are the kind I have on my podcast or on my iPod. They're great to listen to, but they really do work as background music. Bombard the brain with new experiences. I got this from Gregory Burns, who is a neuroscientist at Emory University. He says the brain is fundamentally lazy. Its function is to conserve energy. When our brains encounter something that they've never seen before, it's never seen, like a new place, a new environment, it forces it to make new connections. It's more creative. In other words, folks, take your summer vacation. Get out of the office. You can tell your boss, I told you so. It'll make you more creative. And finally, and this is really important in today's age, and I took this from Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft. Some of you may have read his book, Hit Refresh. Today, more than ever, you need to be a learn-it-all and not a know-it-all. That is so important. Thomas Friedman, the globalization expert for the New York Times, has been writing quite a bit about this. He says we are in the age of the supernova. Every aspect of our lives, our careers, our businesses is being disrupted faster than we can even keep up with, faster than he can even finish a book. It's already changed by the time he's written a book. It's moving faster than you or I think it is. The only thing we have to really separate ourselves is to keep learning and never get complacent. Don't be a know-it-all, be a learn-it-all. The minute you think you know it all, especially in the area of communication and presentation and creativity and leadership, once you're a know-it-all, you're going to stop learning. And if you stop learning, you're going to be average. And average is over. And now this gets back to why I wrote 5 stars. Average is over. 3 stars is average. 4 stars is a little extra, but you need to stand out. The great persuaders are the ones who truly stand out because they are unstoppable, irresistible, and irreplaceable. And that's the final theme that I would like to leave you with. Thank you very much, and thank you, BookPal. Thanks everybody for showing up on this webinar today. I just noticed that the image for 5 stars, the hardcover, doesn't really do it justice, to be honest. It's a beautiful hardcover book, so I'm really pleased that BookPal is offering it to our members. It actually it's metallic. The stars and the letters are raised. It makes a very, very nice gift, and it's something that I hope people will want to hold and read as well. So thank you very much, and let's take some questions. I'd love to hear any questions that our listeners might have.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. What a great presentation, Carmine. I love the part where you talked about the astronauts and how valuable it is for them to be communicators. And that's such an example of a profession where you wouldn't think that to be true, but I mean, that's the reality. So I learned a lot. And let's see, we have a couple good questions that came in. Let's go ahead and start with Yuri. She said, what's the most common mistake you see people making when it comes to storytelling?
Common mistake in storytelling. Well, one is not telling stories. That's one. That's actually one of the most common mistake I see is people forget that they are storytellers. Storytelling is part of our DNA. We are wired for story. And what happens is we we deliver PowerPoints or we deliver presentations, regardless of what format, and we forget that we are inherently storytellers. So I always believe in really making it as personal as possible. And that's another thing that most people don't do in business today. It's all about the slides and the bullet points and the facts and the information about your product or your service. Tell me a little bit about you. Why are you working for this company? What is your personal connection to this particular topic? If you leave me the impression that you're just working for a company to sell the product, to make money, to make your commission, to go on President's Club and have a good time, that's fine, but there's no connection there. In order to stand out, you need to make an emotional connection with people. And the best way we have of transferring our passion for a particular topic to a customer, to another person, is to tell personal is to tell those personal stories. And I don't think a lot of people do. So I think telling personal stories is one of the foundations of a good persuasive presentation.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned that a lot in your book as well. Let's see. Okay, so we have a question that came in from Greg, and he asked, is it true that analogies are better at explaining than they are at being persuasive?
Oh, hold on, Michelle. Are analogies better at what?
Explaining than they are at being persuasive.
Well, okay, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure if I see the distinction. In order for me to, if I'm clear and I can help explain something that you otherwise would not have understand, I am more likely to persuade you to uh, buy into my idea than if I've lost you. So that's why I think analogies are fundamentally very important. They're called shortcuts. Our brain doesn't, like Gregory Burns said, our brain doesn't like to work very hard. Our brains want to conserve energy. So analogies are shortcuts that allow you to take an abstract or an esoteric concept and ground it in the familiar for people to understand. So Warren, and there's a lot of other people who do this brilliantly. Warren Buffett is just someone who has studied it and uses it very well. But I interviewed Neil deGrasse Tyson last year, and I include some of his observations in my book. He's the great astrophysicist and science writer. And that's what he tries to do. He says, Carmine, what you have to do is not dumb down ideas, but to ground ideas in the familiar. So he will compare a mountain on Mars to something that you know on Earth. He may not be calling it an analogy, but that's exactly what he's doing. He's making an analogous comparison to something you're familiar with.
Yeah, that makes, I think too, to your point, analogies are better at explaining things, which therefore makes you more persuasive. So it's sort of one and the same. That, if you want to be persuasive, you have to be good at explaining something.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And it'll make you a more interesting communicator.
Absolutely. All right, we have another question that came in from Stephanie. She asked, at the end of 5 stars, you mentioned that reading books can help you become a better speaker. So what books are you currently reading right now?
Yeah, that book, that question has come up a lot. I read about 75 books a year, so it's really hard for me sometimes to pinpoint the books that I like, or that I'm reading that have really influenced me, because every week I have something new. You understand that, Michelle. I've got really something new. However, I keep going back to a book that came across my radar a few years ago, but it's been around for a long time, and that is the one I mentioned in the webinar, and that's Kahneman's book, Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. So that is the great cognitive psychology book of all time. It explains everything. It explains biases, which, if you want to be a learn-it-all and not a know-it-all, you have to understand biases. You have to understand why people panic, why people get too euphoric, why these extremes go back and forth. So you have to understand psychology to be a better leader. And he also goes into the power of story, the power of communication. So it's one great catch-all book, and he won a Nobel Prize, of course. So it's one great catch-all book that includes psychology, helps you understand the world. It helps you understand why people get so upset all the time. Why people get too euphoric sometimes. When the stock market's going up a lot, they get euphoric. When it goes down, they panic too much. And this gets back to why Warren Buffett is so successful, because he understands those psychological mechanisms that we all are guided by. Every single one of us is guided by these biases. So it's the kind of book that can help you understand yourself, understand people, and also make you a better communicator.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you mentioned that Bill Gates reads 50 books a year, Mark Cuban reads 3 hours a day. I mean, if these guys are on to something, so I need to add
Yeah,
more
no,
books to my list.
and you've seen what Bill Gates does. Bill Gates this year has said if he could give every graduate who graduated this year one book, it would have been Hans Rosling's Factfulness.
Hmm.
And I read Hans's book. He was a brilliant statistician, and you can learn something about communication from a book like his as well, because he takes complex data and he makes it understandable.
Exactly. All right, adding it to my list. Okay, so we have time for one more question, and this is actually my question for you, Carmine, which is that you interviewed some really interesting people for this book. Who is your favorite person to meet with and why?
Oh, without question, Richard Branson. Yeah, I mean he's at the top of my list because he's authentic. Who you think he is really who he is. He thinks about storytelling. He writes about storytelling. He thinks about how to pitch ideas in 10 minutes in a short, concise way. He told me for the book, if you cannot pitch your idea on the back of a napkin, if your idea cannot fit on the back of a napkin, he doesn't want to hear the pitch because it's rubbish. He used a good English term. He said it's rubbish. But he's very open about communication. Communication to him is the foundation for being a successful entrepreneur and a successful leader today. And when you talk to him, he's also not always surrounded by his PR marketing folks, who have him very. When you speak to these billionaires, they're very constricted in what they say, and they're usually surrounded by a group of people who are very careful about, we can only talk about this, but you can't talk about that. Branson's on his own. Branson may have one assistant with him, and he'll meet you wherever. I've met him at a hotel, I've met him at an airport. And we just have these great conversations. And he's very authentic, he's very open, and he's always got a smile on his face. And at first I thought, well, maybe he's got a smile on his face because he's got 5 billion reasons to smile. But no, if you look at the photographs, even when he was poor, he and was kicked out of school, he had a smile on his face. That's the point. You need to follow your passion, have a smile on your face, and always have a good time. Because if you're not having a good time in business, then what are you wasting your time for? So I've personally learned a lot from him, and he's reinforced a lot of the ideas that I talk about when I write about communication skills.
Awesome. Yeah, I would love to be able to grab lunch with him.
It's
All
fun.
right.
It is fun.
Well, on that note, thank you everyone for attending. As a reminder, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar next week if you'd like to share it with anyone. If you'd like to learn more about 5 stars or purchase the book for your organization, visit our website at bkp.al/5stars or send me an email at michelle@book-pal.com. And if you're interested in booking Carmine as a speaker for your next event, you can email tom@brightsightgroup.com. And with that, we hope you enjoyed the webinar. Thank you, Carmine, so much for joining us.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate your time and the opportunity to speak to such a wonderful targeted audience for us of other book lovers. I appreciate it.